everybody, and good morning, good afternoon, and good night wherever you are. For down where I am, it's good morning. So I'll share my screen because I've actually got a bit of a couple of slides that will actually introduce, and we'll talk about process mining. And yes, you did right, Kylie. You know, process mapping is definitely one of the areas that we'll discuss. So I'll just share my screen. Hopefully, everyone can see that. So process mining. It's one of those terminologies that we always come up with new terminology and how we actually do things. But it's important to think that process mining is probably we have now the ability to be able to see things we couldn't see before. And just to give you a bit of a feel, I think hopefully you don't feel I'm too old, but it's about 45 years since I commenced work. And so in that time, you learn and pick up a few things. And processes have always been one of those, I suppose, challenges that people have of, when we start something, we do something, we have a routine, we have a process, we go about the way we do something the same way, sort of thing. And then we bring someone else into an organization and they come along and they have their own set of views, and we end up with a whole lot of processes that we hope are the consistent or the way that we want them done. So what we find is that over time, those processes can be different. The way people do things, we change roles. And as we've gone into the world of digital enablement, we find that that's becoming more and more of a challenge for us, because where we could cope with the fact that people could do processes a certain way and we could accommodate that, and when they went on leave or holidays or left the organisation, someone would come in and pick it up and we'd do a different way, but we'd still get the service delivered or what we were looking to achieve. As we work through, now with enterprise technologies, we have the thing where process mining is becoming, well, how do we understand what processes we're all doing? Do we all do it the same? Does that cause inefficiencies? How do we get consistency? And so in my past life, as I mentioned many years ago, back in the late 90s, there was a process that came out where we talk about process re-engineering. So we'd actually look at organisations, we would unpack what they do, and we would actually then try and align the processes. It worked well for smaller organisations, but when we talk about big organisations, global organisations, very difficult, because there's a lot of factors that go into it. Just even the fact that there's a huge number of people involved in the process. And so process mining is something that technology has given us. In my mind, it's the crystal ball. It's that thing that says, all of a sudden, what are we doing? How can we actually go in and improve? How do we monitor what we're actually doing? So yes, it's a new world. It's a great opportunity, and you can probably tell I'm a bit excited about it, because over the last 4 years I've been involved in working with organisations. And what I could see back in the late 90s, where we were actually re-engineering processes, a lot of the processes were manual and they didn't rely on digital platforms to support them. Whereas today we truly have embraced digital platforms, and we need consistency. We need people to be able to do things the same way. And if we want to automate, we want to do AI, we want to do robotics, that's what it works on. It works on the fact of consistency of process. And if we don't have anything like that, it's very difficult to actually put in automation. So as we walk through today, we'll actually have a bit of a look at process discovery. It's one of the things with many times organisations will have gone through a discovery of their processes. We'll look at the barriers to process mining, because there are distinct barriers that people have, and they aren't the barriers you might think. It's not that it's hard to do, and it's that taking that quantum leap into something that may actually show a reality you don't want to see. So we'll talk about that as well. We'll look at the benefits of process mining, and we'll also look at the process performance measurement. And I think that's an important thing, because it's not about understanding just what your processes are. It's making sure that they stay the same and operate the same and provide the same level of performance as you design them to be ongoing, evergreen. And so to me, that's a very important step for process effectiveness, which supports all of your digital platforms and how they actually operate. So this is Third Stage has had this around for a while, and if you've looked at many of the LinkedIn posts, you might have seen a process review, a process of how you go about understanding your processes and improving processes to support a digital strategy or a roadmap or a change program. So these these are the basic steps that we would go through. But when we start looking at what is available as tools to be able to help us do that, current state is always one of those areas that we go, well, we need to probably understand current state before we move forward to actually implement future state, because that guides what change we might need, how much effort we have to actually put in, what type of interfaces or what type of architecture we might need in our digital platform. And so they're an important step to be able to get us to the future state. But I suppose the one thing we're looking at is when we are triggered by a digital platform or we are putting in a new platform, we find that we need to understand why are we doing it. What are the goals? What's our objectives? How are we going to operate differently in a new world? So that's obviously a first step. And then we get into the current, evaluate our current processes. It's identify what our future should be. Are we going to get any benefits out of it? What are the metrics that we actually are going to measure those processes? And in the past, it would have been hard to be able to do those things. It's hard to actually measure process performance, because how do we measure it? Whereas a lot of process mining tools allow us to be able to keep a look on, keep an eye out, keep a view on how things are performing. And then obviously identify the change impacts. If we have thousands of ways, and in some organisations that we've worked with, there are literally thousands of variants to the way organisations do processes, and that's usually because over time they've grown and people have done different things. Technology may be harder to use, they've created workarounds, and so you get all of these different variants. And then when we come in and we say we want to put in best practice. Best practice is about saying, well, we want consistency, we want it done a certain way, we want a level of alignment across the organisation. And so that's probably the challenge that most organisations have, and that's where a lot of failures come from, is that fact that they don't understand that they actually do their process or the way they go about their business differently across geographies, across different divisions, across all areas of the business. And so one of the big steps is to be able to bring that back, align that, get that back so that it's as close as it can. Then best practice has a chance. Then automation has an opportunity. Then robotics has an opportunity. And so when we start looking at where process mining comes in, we start looking at here's where process mining can actually help us. Evaluating our current processes. For me, I call that what is, because it's what is actually happening, and I'll go into what I mean by that. But that term "what is" something that really is special to me, in the sense that I've sat in lots of sessions where we do current state, and you'll talk to a group of people, and then you bring in a different group of people, and they'll have a different version of how they do things. So what is really current state? What do we really do? Whereas when we look at the process mining tools that we have today, we get the ability to be able to see what is. And that's your base, that's your ability to be able to work on that. And then we can start to say, well, what should those new processes look like? How can we actually clean out some of those things that are causing us disruption, variance, need to change? And it may be that our master data is not right. It may be that we have to have a workaround for certain things. How do we get that so that that's not an issue for us? And that's where those benefits start coming. So how do we get streamlined processes? They are the sorts of things that we're looking to achieve. And then obviously it's about process ownership and metrics. So how do we keep them like that? If they aren't working for us, how do we get it so that we actually are going to focus on those and improve those? And so these are all of the things where the process mining tools allow us to be able to get that insight, to be able to work on it. But I suppose let's go back to the first step of define the business goals. How do we want to operate? That sets the scene for many of the steps that follow after. But you can see here the old way that we would do it. And so many post-it notes, many days, many weeks. And a lot of consulting firms actually build a career on this because they know that this isn't a simple process. And when you've got to get a lot of people involved, you have to get a clear understanding. And you need to probably have a bit of skill when it comes to the facilitation piece of this to be able to really challenge, is that really how it happens? Or is that how it happens in this division? And so what you end up with is that fiction or that best guess, and that's always a challenge, because if we're moving forward and we're going to put in a digital platform and we might spend millions and millions of dollars putting in what we call best practice, yet we operate in a way that isn't really clear, or we have many ways of doing it, it makes it difficult for us to actually go and get that digital platform to actually work as efficiently and as effective and for us. So that's the challenge. Whereas if we look on the right hand side, here's what process mining does, and the tool that we use is and I'm not saying it's the only tool to use. There are a number of tools out there. Signavio is a tool. Spoke to a client just recently, and there's a Microsoft based tool that's out there for some of the Microsoft products. But the one Celonis actually does all of the major ERP digital platforms. So first tier, second tier, there's plugins for all of those. So it probably covers the widest range, and it's recognized in the marketplace as being probably the leader when it comes to process mining tools. So that's I suppose a bit of background on the tool set. But let's not focus on the tool. Let's focus on what it actually gives us. And if we look on the right hand side there, we can see a few squiggly lines. That is actually a process, and that's a process that actually was a standard process. In this case, it's actually in an asset management space, and so we have work orders, and we complete that work and then we close it out. And so that's what this is representing for us. But you can see here that in this we have 87 different variants of that one process. So that means that in our organization we do it 87 times different. And so you go, well, it's very hard for us to be able to say, well, if we're implementing best practice, which one of those 87 is our best practice? And so the aim is to be able to say, well, what's causing us to have to do these things, or have these variants, or have these differences in what we do? And so this is what gives us that, and that's why I talk about it being a crystal ball. This is the view that we actually have, and we can drill down and continue and look at every one of those 87 different variants. In this case here, I think we're looking at the top 7 there. And that gives us a view of what we can actually change, where our differences are, why they're actually happening. And the lower screen actually starts to give us a view of drilling down. So we could actually pick at any one of those points and find out how often it happens, when it happens, what's the circumstance it happens under. And so all of a sudden you actually have really good fact, really clear detail. And for some people, that's quite challenging, because in the past, they built a career on hiding behind their process, and they were the only one who could do that. And when they went on leave or they went out of the system, all of a sudden the business felt it. And so for them, they really were needed. It's that thing of, you can't lose me out of the organization because you wouldn't survive as such. And so, there are some of those things that cause the challenges we have when we're implementing new digital platforms, is the fact that we have humans, and humans like to do things their own way. But if we want to embrace technology, we want to improve, we want to actually get automation, rely on artificial intelligence, do all of those sorts of things, we need to be able to start to understand, what are those differences? Why do we have them? Are they of any value? Do we need them? And what is probably the most simplest way to be able to do things? And when we have organisations that have been around for a long time, you can imagine how much legacy, how much background. And it's interesting when you go into organisations, sometimes you find a process and you say, why do you do that process? Well, I don't know, I was taught to do it when I came in, and that was 20 years ago, and we still do it. But we've got another process that we were told we had to do, so we do that one and that one, and so we end up with this lot of duplication. And these are things that we want to remove out of our organisations. We want to be able to get what's the smoothest, simplest, frictionless way of doing a process. And so it's important for us to be able to identify what is happening. And that's why I talk about what is. It's the factual, it's the detailed. Barriers. And this is something you know, most people go, oh, what's the barrier to it? Is it hard to put in? Is it difficult? Well, essentially what it is, it's a connection into your data set, because every time you actually transact in your digital platform, you leave a fingerprint or a footprint, whichever you want to call it. And that leaves us a trail of breadcrumbs to be able to put together those maps you would have seen there earlier, where we're saying, well, this is what actually happened at this stage, and this took this diversion, and this took this. So we can actually follow that without having to sit in a room and ask people, what do you do? How do you do it? Why do you do it? Because all of a sudden we have it available to us. The next piece for us is to be able to say, well, okay, now we know that. Why do we do it? Does it add any value? Different discussion, but it's one of those things you've got to get to that point. And the big challenge is when you start looking at whole business, enterprise, we need to involve our senior leaders. And many of our senior leaders really don't understand, and I'm not being disrespectful here, because it's not their role to probably understand every intricate detail. But with that comes a blind side. It becomes a blind spot of an organisation. And so, you know, they are reported certain metrics to say, here's how we are performing. But no one ever puts a metric up that says we are red in every quadrant. We perform really, really badly. It's only until really it gets to that point where there's no other choice. You can't choose any other colour but red, that you do it. And so getting senior leaders to actually see the value of consistent process, defining processes, you know, leveraging an efficiency program instead of managing inefficiency. It's a challenge. And so when you're working with organisations, you know, there's often this hesitation to actually adopt what I call the new world of digital process mapping, because people go, well, you know, I'm not sure what it's going to show me, and I'm not sure I trust what it says. But when you actually get in and you actually start looking at it, we worked with a client just recently where, you know, they wanted a design, a process design, and what they got is they got a learning of how many different ways they do things. They actually learnt that there was so many different ways and workarounds, they actually never used their ERP to its potential. I think it's about 2 or 3% of people actually use the ERP. They reported into it. They didn't actually transact in it. And so these are all learnings to say, well, if I'm going to spend millions of dollars putting in a new ERP platform or a new technology platform, I want people to actually use it, not have it there and just, you know, how can we trust the information that's in it? So senior leaders, you know, it's a key thing for them to be able to embrace the ability to say, well, let's look at what we do. Let's not think that we are perfect. Let's understand, let's discover, let's look at what is possible. An effective process involvement is only effective when it's improved end to end. Many times we'll have organisations, I've worked with different divisions of organisations, and they come in and they go, you know, I want you to look at our processes, and we want to map them, and we want to fix them. And you go, well, you have a input area, or you have an area where another division feeds you information, service, whatever, and you have an output. So your piece you could improve, but how do you know that if you're actually getting information or getting materials or you're part of a process that is an end-to-end process, you just improving your piece doesn't actually add value to the whole organisation. And so you need to take a step back and not have that silo view of processes. It's one of those things that organisations, we've divisionalised organisations over time, but we do need to take that step up and say, well, many of the divisions need one to support the other to deliver the other, and that's where this end-to-end concept, or it's not even a concept, it's actually a reality, has come in. A real barrier that you find is when you actually work with organisations, and often you come in at a lower level in the organisation, and they see, you know, the potential of process mining or improving processes, but the challenge they have is that many of the people that they have to convince to actually get to do process mining or really good process improvement are tied to those processes. They don't want to be reflected in a negative way. And so by looking in at that data and seeing all of those breadcrumbs and all of those differences of the way they do things, they feel it judges them. And it's not about judging, it's about saying, well, now we actually have a basis. We have a baseline to actually work from. Not a guess, not someone's interpretation, or they think they do it that way, or they'd like to do it that way, but they don't really want to tell you that that's not done that way. So that's one of the areas. It's very difficult to be able to break that little barrier. And then end-to-end process ownership and measurement. It's not understood. So many times we have, and this just as a recent experience, we had a large consulting firm came in and they talked about putting in end-to-end processes to an organisation that was very silo-based. It had a lot of different divisions. It was vertically integrated at 10,000 employees, so it's a reasonable sized business. And so their level of process ownership was that they had their little piece of the process that they felt they owned, but and they were responsible for. But did it enhance any other area of the business? Could it be measured? No, it couldn't be. And so that's one of the challenges that organisations face, is that when they look at processes, they look at processes on a divisional base. And so you need to look at process ownership at a level where people can actually make the difference and view what performance needs to be. And you can also monitor how that is continually operating. So you've actually got the feedback saying that this process is still working as efficient as it can be. And when it's not, we're mature enough to actually say, what's going wrong? How do we fix that? And we pick it up and learn it quickly. Before we actually let it get out of hand, we create a workaround and we add something else in and we get more complexity. And then soon as we've actually started complexity, it continues to grow, because all of a sudden we create that domino effect. We fix one thing, we break another. Whereas when we look at end to end, we can make sure the whole line of the process is actually seamless. Benefits. And for me, there's a lot more benefits than I actually have listed on here. And at the end of this session, I'll finish early and we'll ask some questions about what people think about whether they've seen benefits or whether they could see some of the benefits. So I won't rabbit on the whole time. So apologies for just running through the presentation, but it gives us a basis to work from. So, accurate what is process flows. They act as that baseline, as I mentioned. It's something that you can't underestimate, knowing what really is happening, because only then can you actually start to address and rectify and align. Because once you get people aligned and understand, I don't even know why we do that, or that doesn't even make sense to do some of those things, then that alignment piece is a critical part, and it supports your change. And change becomes a much easier process when people go, I'm not fighting this change because it makes sense for us to do that, because I can see the value that it actually creates. Clarity. How many different ways of a process is carried out? And so when we can actually start to see why all those workarounds are in there, or what is causing those workarounds. So it's not always people doing it wrong. They have to in some cases, because the business actually hasn't got maturity in some areas of their business. They may have poor data that's actually causing some of this. Or they may have never been trained to actually use a system, so they actually find it easy to slip out into a spreadsheet and do some work and then push those numbers back in, which challenges, do we actually have a source of truth anymore, is probably the question that you raises there. And then we look at process effectiveness. If we actually measure the performance of a process, then that becomes evergreen. If we ever do anything else in the way of putting in a new digital platform, a new change to the business, we have a really clear understanding of how our business operates. Whereas today, many businesses don't have that. And so they embark on, it's like a mystery tour of how to actually put in a digital platform where I don't even know what processes we do. I don't know what the impact's going to be by putting in best practice. And so at the end of our delivery, we find that we've got these gaps. All of a sudden, it doesn't do it the way we used to do it, because we had 10 spreadsheets that we relied on to actually give us this information. And so you can see why there's so many challenges and risks that come with digital transformation, and this is one of those ways of it's a risk buster in the sense that you actually get the ability to see what you're actually doing. Adopt best practice, and best practice is one of those things that, you know, there is world's best practice, and I hear that so often, but what's best practice for your organization to maintain a competitive advantage? And I think that's the difference. If we look at a lot of the disruptors that have come out in recent times, your Ubers, your all of those sorts of organizations that come in and have actually built a market where there was already an existing market, and they've actually muscled their way in and created a new market. And so it takes a lot to do that. But why have they done that? It's because they actually have a very efficient process that allows them to actually come in and be very efficient at what they do. Whereas what's happened in the past, a lot of these other providers in particular industries have found that, you know, their processes get them by. They service a delivery, but they aren't as efficient as they could be. They're not the cheapest way of doing things, and they are not always deliver the best way. And so the ability to be able to adopt best practice that satisfies your competitive advantage is really, really important. Ability to align technology. You know, we look to technology as, you know, it's the savior. It's going to have all the processes in it. It's going to have best practice. Well, it has technology practice. That doesn't mean it's the best practice. And if we look at an enterprise platform, we sell that across many industries, many organizations. So are we all going to be the same best practice? So how do we get our business to align the processes that we have with the technology? The technology will have a way of working, and so that's what they determine as best practice. And so how do we get that? And so if we can actually see what processes we do, where the touch point is with technology, all of a sudden we remove that air gap, that area where we're not sure of, or we have misalignment, which creates many of those reasons why we have workarounds. Process performance measurement. To me, this is the holy grail, to be able to actually look at and monitor your processes. And you can see here's a couple of images where you can actually put a dashboard in. So in this case here, it's throughput time. So how long does it take to actually do the process? You know, if we've got different steps within a process, we can actually break that process down to actually see whether one particular step is holding up the overall. What's the closest way to get our best variant as such, or our best process? So it might not be that it's totally straight line with the process. There might be a couple of little areas where we deviate, but that's actually our best process to satisfy our competitive advantage. And so having this presented to us and our managers and our senior managers, all of a sudden gives them the ability to be able to make sure that what they are looking to do, or how they're actually working in an organization, what the objectives are they being met? Are we doing it the smoothest, simplest way? And focusing on those particular areas of the business that aren't, so that you can actually quickly work on those, then let everything get out of control, or create a fix here which forces a fix over here, and we have those sort of problems. And so digital transformations are often larger than required, because, you know, often we don't understand what we're actually venturing into. And so we find that we get halfway along the journey and we didn't estimate or didn't assume that that would be a problem for us. And so then we've got to go off and fix that. And so that's where we get this time blowout and this cost blowout. And having that clear understanding of the what is reduces your transformation requirement. So for every improvement or upgrade that you might do in the future, as I mentioned, it allows you to be able to to be able to address that, because you actually understand what you're doing. And so again, it's even cheaper when you actually engage a solution integrator. They come in and they go, well, that's the process you want us to work to. We can build a solution that will actually support that. So the cost becomes cheaper. The efficiency, the outcomes become cheaper. And so there's a whole lot of benefits to actually understanding what is, and then working through that process to actually deliver a better outcome.